Welcome everybody, my name's Kimberly and this is Off-Road Reactions. I grew up watching a bunch of really interesting shows. Last video I did Bush Tucker Man. Now I'm going back even further than that, when I was probably, I don't know, a young teen, I'm trying to guess. But I did learn a lot of stuff about traveling in Australia and about mechanical care of vehicles and emergency situations, dealing with emergency situations. It's probably my early introduction to some of that stuff. And I'm talking, of course, about Jack Absalom. Now, Jack was a painter and a producer of television shows who lived in Broken Hill and often did stories about the Strzelecki track, the Birdsville track, and general kind of outback survival. So this is one of those. It's called Jack Absalom's The Road to Survival. And it's very old, as you'll tell, but I've got a few interesting comments to make about it. I do remember parts of this, watching this as a kid or a young person. And so I have an inkling of what's coming. So let's do it. Oh, who remembers those old styrofoam water bottles?
Oh, thanks.
Although I have to say, this is obviously one of the later ones, so I would have been in my late teens, I suspect, when this one came out, because that's an 80s motor car, 1980, 81, something like that, Commodore. So yeah, I would have been at college by then.
Is that all the water we've got? Here, sweetheart. We near a town?
Back that way. Maybe there's a homestead up ahead.
Don't you know what's wrong with it?
Try keep out of the sun. I'll be back as soon as I can.
I'm pretty sure I know what Jack's going to say here, but yeah, you shouldn't be out in the middle of nowhere not knowing what's around you. You've really got to be aware of, where homesteads might be, where towns are, all that kind of thing. Take maps.
Come here, love.
That scene has all the ingredients for another tragedy. He's walking off looking for help. He hasn't got a clue where it is. It could be just around the first bend, but it could easily be 100 miles away. Now, he has no water. He has not even got a hat on. He's left the wife and child there. They have no water. Now, in this temperature out here, he would last 4 hours normally. But the way he's doing it, probably 1 hour. And then he'll be a very distressed person.
And Jack's absolutely right here. You get above the 41 degrees C, get to the 42, 43s and above. In particular, but even a little bit cooler than that, you can get in distress pretty quickly. Now, in the 40s degrees Celsius I'm talking about, you may well be dead in 4 hours, absolutely stone dead. And there are people who've died that way on some famous walks in Australia, like Kings Canyon, walking on the top. A German fellow died. He'd been seen 4 hours before and he's dead within 4 hours. So, yep, he's absolutely right.
The risks that these people have taken coming into the outback unprepared is unbelievable to me.
And now, before you comment about them driving a Commodore on that sort of road, they're the sorts of vehicles that we drove. I remember, driving to one of my favorite campsites in my 1965 Toyota Corona. And that track was considered grade 5 by my four-wheel drive club, required low range and a winch. So, we learned how to drive vehicles doing that stuff. Of course, we weren't traveling alone, but here's Jack. I know that's Jack because I know he drove a Sigma. So, yeah, that's what we drove. Sigma or a Magna. Anyway, he started off with a Sigma. Anyway, it's a Mitsubishi.
Isn't this marvellous? To be alone in such a landscape as this. It's something I feel that every Australian should have the opportunity of doing, because this is unique. But beneath all that beauty, there is the harshness. It's part of the beauty. But you must constantly be aware, if you want to travel this outback of Australia, that there can be danger. This is my survival kit for the bush. First, my swag. You must have somewhere to sleep. Then, in next importance, my water containers. I've put in an extra one here to show you. I've got a 4-gallon one. I don't like these. I prefer them in 1 or 2 gallons, because if this busts, I lose 4 gallons. If they bust, I only lose 1 gallon or 2 gallons. Much safer. I've got my petrol in jerry cans. I've only got 1 jerry can because it's only a small trip. If I'm going on bigger trips, I take more.
Just to comment before he goes on, this jerry can is a steel jerry can, but it's an older steel jerry can. Do not go buying steel jerry cans these days. They're not strong. And what happens in the cool air of the evening in the desert in particular, they shrink and then they expand and then they shrink and they'll crack very, very quickly. So just go for the plastic ones. Do, however, make sure you get ones that you can tighten the lids up really well on. I have ones with ratcheting kind of caps.
Esky for me tucker and a coldie. That's the food position. Now, here I have me toolkit. Toolkit is very important. You can't do repairs if you haven't got the right tools. How can you get a bloody nut off if you can't find a spanner to fit it? Have a reasonable toolkit. Radiator hoses. Fan belt. Very importantly, a pump. Now, I prefer the air pump that hooks onto the engine and pump the tyres up. You can have a guts buster if you like. I don't like that.
These are interesting days. I remember guts busters, as he calls them, the hand pump. You can still buy them. You can buy the foot version as well, and you can still pump a car tyre with it. Don't you worry about that. You can certainly do that. Fan belts. Now, most modern cars have a serpentine belt. Mine actually doesn't, but most do. And I've said to people before, just because it's a complicated thing to replace doesn't mean you shouldn't carry a spare. For instance, if you are broken down on the side of the road and I come along and you've got a spare serpentine belt, it's a heck of a job, but I can replace it for you. And even if you can't. So, don't think, oh, that's a job just for the mechanic shop. Carry the serpentine belt, because even more importantly these days, we could get away with one broken belt sometimes if it was driving, I don't know, something not so critical, like it's driving the alternator, but maybe not the cooling system, whatever. And even then we could probably get away with it in some cars. Nowadays, though, you can't do without an alternator, and what's more, the belt that drives the alternator drives everything else as well. So if the belt breaks, then you lose everything, and you'll only go for a few minutes with a modern car. So because the computers need a minimum voltage. So unlike an old car where you could actually pull the battery out once you started the car, and actually the car will keep running, you can't do any of that these days. There'll be more that's very different that Jack's going to talk to us about, and I'll try and raise the points as we get along there.
I've got a first aid kit. Get a first aid kit, make it up to suit yourself. Just things you prefer. Now here, this is what I call my box of tricks. I've got dozens of little odds and ends in here, but a couple of very important ones. First of all is the coil. Now, if you break down and you've done your coil, you've had it, unless you have another coil. So you must carry one of these.
Okay, he's going to go on to a couple of other things here for sure, but I'm going to mention this. If you've got an older car, older petrol car, this is not applying to diesels. Diesels don't need a coil. If it's got that kind of coil, by all means, carry it. But most modern cars now have coil packs on top of the spark plugs. So there's an individual coil for each spark plug, and so therefore it's not something you're going to carry spares of. And with CAN bus technology and everything else, it's a bit awkward. So you're not going to do that, but they're a hell of a lot more reliable. And because they're individual coil packs on individual spark plugs, you can lose a couple of them and the car will keep running. Lose that coil there and you're finished.
A set of points and a condenser. Now, if you burnt out a set of points in the bush, you would have to have somebody come along with the same make of car, with a spare set and prepared to give them to you. That's ridiculous. So don't do this. With these things, all you're doing by having them with you is buying them a little earlier, because you'll be up for them this year or next year, and it's for your safety that I'm talking about.
Yeah, so once again, modern car, you're not going to have a distributor, you're not going to have points, you're not going to have a condenser. Not on most modern cars anyway. So you've got the ECU controlling where the spark goes, and in fact, modern cars do all kinds of weird things with how they deliver spark and all kinds of weird things, how they inject fuel into the engine and everything else. That's not to say, though, that you can't troubleshoot them and, solve problems with them with a bit of knowledge. But you certainly don't need, and there would be no such thing as a set of points for instance, my Volkswagen Golf. If I went into the auto shop and said, "Can you give me a set of points for a 2010 Volkswagen Golf TSI?" they'd just laugh at me.
To most people living in the cities, this is the real outback, a deserted, empty country with the road running away forever. And they look around. All of a sudden it occurs to them, I wonder what would happen if I broke down here. On a road like this, they would have no worries. It's a bitumen road, and they only put these roads down where there's a lot of traffic. Stop by your car and wait. Somebody's going to come along. I go on these painting trips 3 or 4 times a year. Normally I use a 4-wheel drive vehicle, but for this trip I've taken an average family car just to show you that you can go into the bush with practically any car as long as you realise its capabilities. painting scenes like these for the last 10 years. I can't help it. This country fascinates me. I've been around the world a couple of times. But to me, the Australian outback has something special about it. Some of this country is desolate, dry, hot and bare. You have to be prepared to be your own food supply, your own petrol supply and your own mechanic. Out here there's no friendly service stations. They're very few and far between. Just the odd sign to warn the unwary traveller. I've come across many families like this. Good people who understand city living, but they do not know how to travel safely in the bush. This has got to be ridiculous. These people have come out here with just their own personal luggage. Like, there's no toolkit, there's no spares, I can't see any petrol, and there's no water. This chap couldn't start this car. The odds are it's either petrol or it's spark. Now, I'm going to do a very simple test on the spark for a start off. And what I do, I pull the centre wire out of the distributor. And I hold that in my hand. Then I take the top off the distributor and just push the top out the road somewhere, so it's not in my road. Now, with the car switched on, I then flick the points here, and I should get a nice blue spark across onto the body. And if I get that blue spark, there's nothing wrong with electrical. And there's the blue spark. No worries at all there.
Okay, so no distributor, no points in most modern cars. The spark is also much, much, much stronger. You'll get a heck of a boot. And, you want to be really careful handling high tension leads on modern cars. But that's not to say that you still can't do a very similar test if you know what you're doing. You don't obviously have a distributor, but you can check for a spark. It's not that hard to do. So it can be hard to get at things. That's one problem with a lot of modern cars, the way they're built, the way their engines are covered over, the way their coil packs are done, all that kind of thing. But it is possible. And you should, if you want to be really proficient at looking after your own vehicle and dealing with everything that happens out in the bush, either travel with someone who has this kind of knowledge or learn some of this stuff yourself about your specific car.
That's good. Now that shows me there's nothing wrong with that electrical system at all. It's got to be the petrol now. Now what I'm going to do here is get the air cleaner off the top of this carburetor, just put it out the road, and I should be able to work the accelerator and squirt petrol in there, but there's none.
Okay, so again, you're not likely to see a carburetor on a modern car, and what Jack's doing there is he's actuating the throttle to drive what's called the accelerator pump, which is a little pump inside the carburetor. It has a little leather boot on it or leather plunger is probably the right word, that pushes a squirt of extra fuel in when you rapidly accelerate. By doing that, he can tell whether there or not there is fuel supply, although having said that, if there's fuel in the bowl, it's going to squirt. So just be aware, fuel in the bowl doesn't indicate that for certain that the car doesn't have a fuel problem, as I think we'll find out in a minute. I'll try and explain if I can.
Now this is the trouble. There's no petrol squirting into there at all. So I've got a blockage somewhere between the carburetor and the petrol tank. Now don't start pulling things to pieces for a minute. Just look.
Yeah, this is really good advice too. Just look. What I was trying to say is that, the car might start but not run because it can't keep the fuel supply up. And in that case, you might get a squirt of petrol out of the carburetor, but eventually it would stop. So Now, can you look for fuel supply issues with a modern car? Yeah, you can, absolutely. And some of you have been with me on trips will know you've seen me deal with the fuel issues, whether it's, trying to empty petrol out of a diesel tank by running the fuel pump on the Canning stock route, or trying to do a similar thing at Fink by trying to turn on the primer pump. Troubleshooting leaking fuel systems up on the Hay River when trying to find out where the system's leaking from. All these things are possible. I hear lots of people say modern car, wouldn't even know where to look, possible to service a modern car, possible to do these things with a modern car, impossible to, fault find them. No, it's not. I can fault find most electronic fuel injection systems with a multimeter. So, as I say, if you want to build some competency around this, maybe do a bush mechanics course, do as much study as you can about these kinds of systems, and be honest though, there's a lot of common sense, if you like. There's a lot of, what Jack's talking about here. Don't go pulling stuff apart. If you don't know how stuff goes together, be really careful pulling apart. I'm not saying you shouldn't. I've pulled apart many things that I had no clue how they go together, but there's a way to do this stuff. Take your time. I'll give you a classic example from my own experience. It's not exactly pulling things apart, but it's close to it. We had an electrical fault in a client's car in the Simpson Desert, and I was busy trying to work out the logistics of what we were going to do. And I said to somebody, I had a mechanic brother-in-law who I had asked to investigate the fuses. I said, just have a look, see which fuse is blown. And those of you who know Toyota Land Cruiser fuse boxes will know that's pretty hard to know what's in there. There's not a lot of guidance. It's just numbers. It doesn't tell you this is the trailer socket fuse. It just says fuse 32 or something. So he started doing that, but someone else came along and started pulling fuses out at the same time. So now there's two people pulling fuses out of the same box. That's a recipe for disaster, because you'll forget where you pulled yours from. So you'll be putting fuses back in the wrong spot, and there are empty spots in fuse boxes. So, and that's exactly what happened. So then I had to go back through it and try and find what had been done wrong. Fortunately, we found the issue. So yeah, what he's saying here, take your time, don't get pulling stuff apart, think about things. Think in a practical way. If that's not getting to here, what could be stopping it?
Along, come down here, petrol pump. We've got it, mate. I've got a fuel filter here, and I get him off with more garbage in it than there is in the rubbish dump. Have a look at this. Paint, water, petrol. That's what's caused the problem. That's blocked the fuel from coming through to the carburettor. Now either put a new one of those on or connect the line together. But we can get petrol through to that and it will go.
You don't trust me bloody petrol, eh?
No, mate, always suspicious of bush supplies, I'm telling you. Thank God they're out here, we'll never get any petrol. What I'd done there was tipped a cup of metho in my tank. And the idea of that was that if I got any water out of this petrol, which you'd get in the bush, simply because of condensation out of the drums, that metho would break it up and it would go through and you would burn it. And then there would no risk.
Yeah, so you can still do this with petrol cars. I haven't ever tried it with Opal fuel. I should do that. I suspect it'll be fine, but don't quote me that it is fine. I'm not sure with Opal fuel. But and certainly don't do it with diesel. But with a petrol car, you can do this for sure. I did it with my lawnmower a couple of weeks ago. I left my lawnmower out in the rain, and it got a little bubble of water in the tank, and I put some metho in and cleared it up. because it has to be a tiny bit of metho with a mower. But anyway, you can get diesel additives that work in a different way. And with diesel vehicles, what I say to everybody is try not to run them down past about a quarter of a tank. Always leave a little bit of diesel in there. And please, manufacturers, can you put bungs back in the tanks, for God's sake, so we can drain the tank occasionally? Thank you.
So that's protection. You remember down the track when those people were broke down and the fuel filter was blocked? Now that was caused mainly by water in there. There was a lot of other rubbish, but the water had finally blocked that filter up. If they'd have put metho in, no hassle at all, it would have gone through. The thing I like about coming out into the bush is all this nature. Look around and enjoy it all. Like, I've come hundreds of miles to get off the beaten track, and to see something like this is just marvellous. This is what it's all about. You've got to enjoy the thing. And like in a place like...
How do I get where he is here? I'd say it's on somewhere down Strzelecki Way, the Cobbler Sand Dunes or somewhere like that. Anyway.
There's two very important things in a situation like this. One is water, which I have plenty of, and the other one is patience, which I have plenty of. Now, when I bogged that bloody thing up there, I was furious. That is not the state of mind to be in to do anything. You're far better off, sit down quietly, boil the billy, relax, think about it all.
This is really good advice. Really, really good advice. I see so much of this, particularly from the Rip Tear Bus Brigade, as I call them. One of my jobs as a tour leader is to make sure that everybody is safe whenever something like this happens, and to make sure that vehicles are safe as well. And one of the issues that you have as a tour leader is managing lots of people who want to go and attack the problem. And what you have to do as a tour leader is you have to remind everybody in a subtle way that you're in charge, that, you know, we're going to do this the way that is correct and safe. And that requires everybody to, first of all, calm down. This is really important for recovery situations, but other situations as well, whether they be first aid situations or whatever. So, yep, take some time out. Think about it.
This isn't much of a sand bog. If I had been concentrating instead of bloody talking, I wouldn't have ever got into the thing. Now, what you've got to do is just let your tyres down enough so that they're not cutting into the sand. They're rolling on top of the sand. And then don't let anybody get near a shovel, for God's sake. The first thing they'll do is start digging you deeper.
Well, I disagree with that, Jack. The shovel's really, really handy, but yeah, people will start digging around the tyre, but this is where you have to take control. There's no problem with doing what Jack's doing now, using a shovel. And in fact, shovel and recovery boards should be the second mode of recovery. The first mode of recovery is to not get bogged in the first place, which requires vehicle and track preparation. So my advice would be, if Jack had known he was going to drive into that sand, and this is obviously all set up, it's, you know, just role playing. If he had known he was going to drive in that sand, it would have been better to have his tyres deflated before he went in there, then he wouldn't have got bogged and needed to deflate them. They'd already be deflated. So the first rule is prepare your car and prepare the track.
All you need to do is just get down like this, scrape out the sand from in front of the tyres. When you've done the four of them, just get in the car and just drive the damn thing out. Now these tyres are too flat to drive safely around this country, so I must pump them up again.
Yeah, again, I disagree with this, and I'm going to come back to this image of this tyre if I can. I know what Jack's getting at, but I'm just gonna put a bit of a qualifier on it. I just want to get the image of the tyre first. Actually, they might be a little bit too flat. So, sorry, Jack, you're probably right. Yeah, look, what's the right sand pressure for sand? This is something that comes up all the time, and I say, if you want 11 opinions on what pressure to run your tires at in sand, like in the Simpson Desert, ask 10 people. The thing is, there is no correct pressure. It depends on the tire type, tire construction, weight of the vehicle, weight on individual wheels, lots of things, right? And this is just a normal car tire. This is not a four-wheel drive like truck tire. But the right way to do this is by measuring the footprint from the front contact patch on the ground to the rear of the contact patch on the ground. And for sand driving, it should be 300 mil. Now, that's a bit more than 300 mil, I'm pretty certain, by looking at it. So Jack's right, it is a bit too deflated. But if you deflate down to that kind of footprint, you're probably going to be in the vicinity of 50% of your highway pressure. And so you might be able to, depending on how inflated it is, drive, 40 or 50 k's an hour. But in places like the Simpson Desert, you're rarely getting over 20. So don't be up and down with your tire pressures in places like the Simpson Desert or Fraser Island or anywhere like that. Do your 300 mil footprint and then just drive slowly.
Now these tyres are too flat to drive safely around this country, so I must pump them up again. I always pump my spare tyre to 100-pound pressure. And then when I get problems like this, I transfer the air out of the spare tyre into these tyres. No hassles, costs nothing, nice and simple.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd like to put 100 pounds of pressure in a standard car tyre on a standard car wheel. These tyres have a maximum pressure rating and it's not 100. So anyway, I know lots of people do this. Not my favourite way to do it.
I've made up this air transfer hose, and what I'm going to do is just transfer the air out of my spare tyre into the flat tyre and pump it up. It's as simple as that. And there is no problem with pumping your spare tyre up to 100-pound pressure. It's quite safe at this.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but I'll take your word for it, Jack. I wouldn't do it.
One of our recent tragedies in Australia, a woman and a child perished. In country, very similar to this. Now, they did not die of lack of water. They died of exposure. That's the killer out in this country. But you've got to remember that people and animals have lived in this country for thousands of years, and they've worked out how to handle this. Look, let me take you and show you how the kangaroo handles it. Beautiful shady tree, lovely dried up creek bed. What a nice place to make a camp. This is the kangaroo camp. He's come in here And he's dug this hot soil off the top, down here, to the damp stuff, where it's cooler. And he lays in that. And even the wind funneled along this creek keeps him cool. And with the shade, perfect spot. Like when you look around here, dry creek, there's not much evidence of life. But there is life here. When I see plants as green as this, I know that their roots would have to be going down into moisture because they couldn't be that green in an area as dry as this. This bank has lots of tracks, most of them kangaroos. They've been coming and going out of this creek. They all seem to be leading to the one spot where they've been scraping around. Much of Australia's water is below the surface in huge basins and underground streams. Sometimes these streams flow near the surface and form a soak, just like this. Nothing wrong with that, that's beautiful water. Probably a dash of whiskey to improve it, but marvellous. They're all working very nicely. I don't think I'll go thirsty tomorrow. Quite pleased with this. And have a look at the rest. Here we have a variety of different plants. I've put saltbush in this one, going all right. Blue bush in this one, that's condensing nicely. And this one's the squashy stuff. I've got bullocky bush and other squashy plants. Now, you can use any plant, any of the foliage off the trees, any plant you see right throughout Australia. That sun that's dragging the moisture out of me is dragging the moisture out of in there, just the same. So I've turned the thing around. It's working for me now. So really, there is no excuse to go thirsty in a country like this.
You do need an awful lot of bags, though, to get enough water for one person. And yes, by all means, carry those big plastic bags, but carry a dozen of them.
There's enough blue bush out there to have a bath if you had enough plastic bags. One of the most common problem areas in the bush is a flat battery. Now, that battery does two things. It supplies power to the starter motor to turn the engine over, and very importantly, it supplies power to the coil to fire the spark plugs. Now, although that battery is flat, to the stage it would, and it wouldn't turn this engine over, there's still enough power going through that coil to give me the spark at the spark plugs to start it. Now that's all I need.
Yeah, look, I think I've seen this one before, and I'm going to make some comments about modern cars versus this type of car in a minute.
Now I've chopped all the wheels. All I have to do is jack the rear wheel on the driver's side up and make sure that it's solid, because when this car starts up, I don't want it to fall off the jack. I turn on the ignition and I put the car in top gear. Then I'm going to use the wheel as a crank to start the car. Now be careful of clearance for your hand, because this can be a little dangerous.
Yeah, look, it is a recipe for the car bolting away on you. Survival situation, absolutely, you could do this. Even with a modern car down to a certain voltage, you could probably do it. You notice the differential bouncing up and down there pretty badly, so I'd recommend you probably put it on something a bit more substantial than a jack, chassis stand or something like that, because if it falls off that jack, you know what's going to happen. It's going to take off, and it's in top gear. It's probably going to stall, to be honest with you, but it may well, if it's a bit of slope, it may actually take off on you. Certainly could injure you. There's another way of doing it, putting a rope around the wheel as well, and he's probably going to show that. I think I have a recollection of that, watching that when I was younger. Let's have a look.
Now that wasn't easy, but the point is I've got the car going. That's the important thing. Now, supposing that I had no battery at all, somebody had pinched it or lost it or whatever you like, there's no battery here. Most people have another battery in their car and they don't realise it. My spare batteries are in this, just a torch. Now, these batteries are not going to have enough power to turn the starter motor, but they've got plenty of power to give me the spark at the plugs to start the engine. And in this case, I've got two 6-volt ones. You don't have to have 6 volt. You can have the small ones and join them together, but you must have 12 volts when they're joined. First thing is...
Does anyone remember these 6-volt batteries? I do. Dolphin torches and the like use them. I don't think anybody carries anything like this anymore. We all got LED rechargeables, whatever else. And it tells you how much things have changed, potentially for the worse when it comes to these kinds of situations. But I know what Jack's going to do here, and he's exactly right. You could do this. You could do this even with a modern car. You know, as long as it didn't have too many smarts. So let me phrase it this way. You may possibly be able to do this with some modern cars. Others are just going to tell you no, because of various smart systems that they have.
To connect the two batteries together, positive to negative. Now this gives me 12 volts. Now, I've taken the wires off the coil on the positive side, so I put my own wire on this, and I connect it to the positive side of the torch battery, which is here. The last thing is to connect the earth of my batteries to the earth lead of the car.
Yeah, that's going to be almost impossible with a modern car. As I said before, potentially you could find a way to use 12 volts to provide what you need for a spark for some modern cars, but it'd be a heck of a job. I can't even think of an example now where you could make it work, but as I said, I'm not prepared to say it's impossible with a modern car. I've just not sat and looked at a particular car. I might do that sometime in the future, to have a look at my Volkswagen Golf and see if there's actually any way to do something similar, given that you don't have a coil and, well, you don't have a single coil. Yeah, interesting. That'd be a good exercise to try and figure out. Giving myself a task to do. The issue you've got, though, with lots of modern cars, there's lots of interconnecting systems. So, you know, if it doesn't have voltage to other places, other ECUs, because modern cars have more than one electronic control unit. They'll have one for the transmission, one for the engine. They'll have a CAN bus technology that tells you, you know, your headlights not working, and every other system in the car is monitored in a similar way. So potentially it's possible. I've set myself a challenge now to find out if there is a car that you could try and find a way to get spark using just a 12-volt battery. Interesting. Okay. I do know that he's exactly right that you could do it in this type of car.
Now, after you've done this, all you have to do is tape everything up solid so it won't rattle about and come loose, then start your car up.
How many times have I push started my own car in my youth? You want to make sure those batteries are pretty secure. Yeah. All right.
I've driven a car like this for over 100 kilometres, just on torch batteries like these, and it was still going strong when I stopped. In any case, there's no problems about it getting you to help if you're back.
Yeah, so while I'm prepared to say that potentially you might be able to work out a way to get a spark in a modern car, you wouldn't be able to drive it very far, because those kind of batteries would likely go flat pretty quickly driving the computers. So yeah, it was exercising, kind of just get my brain working just to see if I could think of a way to make that work. But it's futile anyway, because you aren't going to be able to drive anywhere. Not any distance anyway.
Batteries failed. This is the dog-proof fence. It was built many years ago just to keep the dingo from coming into the sheep country. There are gates similar to this every 30 or 40 kilometres all the way along this fence, and they must be properly closed after use. These signs always fascinate me. Every time I come to one of these gates, I'm tempted to leave the thing open, and I look around and I wonder which bush the bloke's going to jump up from and say, "You've left me gate open, give me $100.
Notice him doing a walk around. He stopped, he's doing a walk around. Pay attention to this, guys and girls. This is what you got to do.
If you're going to have any trouble in the bush, the sooner you know about it, the better. Now, the person that gets out to open the gates is the only one that's seeing the outside of the car and the load all the time. And it's very important for him to check the tyres, look at the load, and especially when he's closing the gate, look back to where the car has stood. Because if there's been anything wrong, say like a hole in your gearbox, there'll be a little pool of oil where it'd only be a drip if you're driving along. So this is important, and you chop it all off before it starts. This fence is the longest fence in the world. This even makes the Americans jealous. 10,000 kilometres of it. It stretches from the Great Divide in Queensland up to the Gulf country, then down to the New South Wales border, and then snakes its way across South Australia and finishes up in the Bight, near the Western Australian border. That is amazing. 10,000 kilometres of a strong high fence just to keep a wild dog away from the sheep. That shows you how important this grazing industry was then, when Australia rode on the sheep's back, and just how powerful these people were to be able to get a project like this started and then finished, and that fence has worked. This is the finest wool growing area in the world. These sheep have been specially bred to thrive in these conditions. They produce wool that is most sought after for the export market. This fence has been so effective that there are very few dingoes south of it. So few, in fact, that one of the dingo's main foods has flourished to plague proportions. The dingo was the kangaroo's only natural enemy, possibly drought being the other one. But now south of the fence, there are no dingoes, and consequently the roos have bred into vast numbers, and the whole situation has got completely out of hand. This country is ideal for the kangaroo. The only thing that was lacking was water. Once the station owner supplied the water, you have a most perfect environment. I've seen ridiculous situations where a station owner had 5,000 sheep on his place and 20,000 kangaroos. Unbelievable. I remember the first time I came to these huts. At that time, this fence was patrolled by camels, and it wasn't until after the war, when four-wheel drives come, that the four-wheel drive took over from the camel. Now that's all gone. We've lost something with this. They race around now, the gasoline cowboys patrolling the fence every now and again. When you came to these huts, every hut had a character in it, and they were a special breed of people. They had to be to live out in an area like this. In that bag is the greatest invention that was ever offered to the outback traveller. I would have paid $1,000 for that a few years ago when I was in the bush all the time, because bogs drove me mad. I hate them. If I got in a mud bog, this is the thing to get it out. Look what's in here. That's all it is a bag with a lead on it. Put that under me car, just there, and then all I do is connect the connection to the exhaust pipe, and that'll fit any exhaust pipe. How easy was that? All we got to do now, if it was a mud bog, clean the hole out, put some sticks or stones or piece of tin, whatever you can find, let the car come down on it, then go and do the other side. And all I've got to do to let it down, to stop it, take that off there, let it down here any time I like, just steadily. And I drive away laughing. And if you can tell me anything easier than that to get out of a bog, I'll buy it. One of the main problem areas I find that travellers into the outback have is getting not so much really lost, but spun around. They get onto wrong roads and this type of thing. Now, the easiest way to eliminate this is after you've had dinner overnight and you've settled down, get your map out. Put it on, say, the bonnet of the car, put north to north, face it up level, and then have a look where you're going to travel next day. And just for instance, you look and you see that you're travelling west all day. So when it happens that the road branches into two or a turn-off comes up or something like this, you can very easily pick the right one by just looking at your compass, bearing in mind that you're going to go west.
It's got a bit of wire dragging underneath the car there, which goes to show you've got to be really observant. Now, we all, not all, but most of us now drive with digital maps. And I find that actually results in people being less aware of directions, where they are, all that kind of thing. Perfect example, the Simpson does it when I say to people, 7 vehicles eastbound, 35 kilometers, west of XYZ point, and I'll hear people press the button on their UHF respond by saying, "Where are we? Where are we?" They actually don't ever know where they are, and I've even heard people say, I might say I'm on the WAA line, and I've heard them say, "Well, what line are we on?" So I actually think digital maps are great for kind of, knowing we're on a spot that looks like this in this space, but we don't really know where we are in the big picture. So I always look at my big maps for planning, my paper maps for planning. I always use them to communicate with other people when I've got a tour group or something and I'm talking about where we're going, we pull out the big paper map. The other thing I find is when people are using GPS all the time, they are actually completely unaware of cardinal directions, north, south, east, west. And it's really interesting when you get to know Indigenous people all over the world. Most of them speak only in cardinal directions. Now, while they're in their language, they might have another word for them. They use cardinal directions. So, for instance, an Indigenous person might not say, I'm standing behind you, or I'm standing in front of you, or I'm standing to the left of you, or I'm standing to the right of you. All of those things are what we call relative positions. They talk in cardinal positions. I'm standing to the north of you. I'm standing to the southwest of you. They don't speak in those relative terms. They speak in cardinal terms. So that's because they're constantly aware of direction all the time. Yeah, bit of wire under there.
That's fencing wire. I bet everybody that has been in the outback has done exactly what I done there. Had to climb under their car to unhook a bit of this stuff. You've got to do it because if it wraps around your diff, it can chop your brake hoses in halves. Trailers and caravans can be a nightmare because you can't hear it. It's behind and it chops the seals out. They finish up the dirt, gets into the bearings, and you've got big problems. But don't knock it. This stuff has replaced more parts in motor cars over the years than probably anything in the bush. They've used it for everything, for nuts and bolts, for wiring this up and everything. I'll show you what I'm going to do now. As soon as I get this cut off, a piece like that, we will show you how to make a compass. With a piece of fencing wire, I wrap around an ordinary piece of electrical wire. Then by touching these ends of this electrical wire onto the terminals of the battery, I make an electromagnet. My piece of fencing wire is now a permanent magnet. Why I've come over here, whenever you want to read a compass, get at least 30 or 40 feet away from a car, because there's too many influencing things in a car with your compass. Not only this compass, any compass. And also another thing, when you've got a compass like this, try and get out the wind. A little bit breezy today and it's very hard to settle down. Now, what I've done, I've just stuck a bit of taper in here with a bit of cotton on. And I'd hold that compass up. And it's roughly pointing that way and this way. So look, we'll draw a line here. That is roughly the line of this compass. Now, some smart person's going to say to me, oh yes, that's bright. Which end's north and which end's south? Good question. But because we are in the southern hemisphere, every shadow cast by the sun is cast to the south side. So if I put up a stick and we see which way the shadow of that's pointing, it's pointing that way. So that is the south end. So that must be the north end. There you are. I've showed you how to make Absalom's bush compass. No risk with it. But you must know what hemisphere you're in. And if you don't know that, then you're completely bushed. This Australia of ours is a very dry place. And when you look around an area like this, it makes you realise just how dry. Like if it wasn't for this water here, all this area wouldn't be worth a tinker's curse. The worst thing that can happen to this water is for it to become polluted. The most common way that happens is when people put soap in it, because then the stock won't drink it. They can't drink it. You wouldn't, I wouldn't. And consequently they perish. Look, I've seen people sitting in there having a bath, just a bath the same as you do at home. I've seen 800 sheep perish because a person used soap powder to do their washing in there.
You know, it's got a lot worse than this now. Most properties won't even let you near their properties, let alone near their water sources. People are stealing solar panels off solar pumps, all that sort of thing. But in this day here that we're talking about, when Jack's traveling here, early 80s, you know, they were much more open, and they would say, yeah, fine, you can camp on my property, not a problem. Stay near the road. Don't camp near the water source. Because just being there stops the stock going to drink. So, you know, if you do find a property owner who's considerate enough to let you onto his property, just pay attention to the fact that the water sources are gold. Don't go near them unless you need to take a container to fill it with water, in which case don't contaminate the water source, and don't stay there. Move away. It might seem very convenient to camp next to the water source, but you'll stop the animals, the stock, from drinking.
Now, when all this happens, this property owner, he becomes very angry. You can't blame him, because you've probably cost him thousands of dollars. His stock has perished just through one thoughtless act.
There you go. Oh, g'day, Jack. How are you? All right. You're pretty warm. You want a cup of tea?
Bloody oath, that's the best news for today, I've heard, mate.
Good on you.
John Ferguson and his wife Sue are typical of the bush people throughout Australia. They've lived here all their lives, and they will help anyone in trouble.
Hello, Sue.
Hello, Jack.
How you going?
Very well, thanks.
But some travellers do not realise that these people have a large property to run, with plenty of problems, without the tourists adding to them.
We're not the dinky-dyed tourists, we don't, but it's these fly-by-nighters or the weekenders, say they knock off work about 4 o'clock or so and, grab a few echoes and jump in the car and away they go, head up north, in the outback. Okay. And they're the ones we have the most problem with, because they usually leave without a jack or...
No preparation at all?
No preparation whatsoever, They just hop an old jalopy and they go, she'll be right. She's all right on the bitumen probably, but gets out here in the corrugation and the rocks, and next thing they're calling on you for tyres and tubes, you name it,
It's supposed to be a garage.
Do you have any other problems?
Well, like that time when we came back from the Angepina races that day. There we are, driving down the road, and I looked at the water up the road here, and there's this 2 caravans right next to the trough, and they had a line of washing from the windmill to the overflow. No worries.
What, they pulled up alongside the
yes,
trough?
right alongside the trough. And the cattle, that was the main watering point for about, 150 head of cattle, because they wouldn't come in.
Of course they wouldn't.
That's the sort we call terrorists.
Most station owners don't call travellers tourists anymore. Like Sue, they call them terrorists. It's a pity it's got this way, because it's only a small percentage of the tourists that cause this trouble. But if you are in real trouble, they will all help you. Don't demand help. Just ask politely. I've never known one of them that would turn their back on anybody in trouble. I've got nothing against the Poms. I think they're marvellous.
I'm all right, Stu. You're all right, mate.
Listen, and if you're a mechanic, I don't give a bugger what you are, where you're from. Always a handy man.
He's handy, all right, on the job.
What do you think of these hotels here now, compared with the English pub?
Oh, these are more homely.
You think these are more homely?
Oh, yeah.
What about when you go in over there and you get the hot beer and the cold pies?
Oh, you don't get the hot beer over there, no.
What are you talking about? I was in England, never had a cold drink all the time I was there. I never like to go past these bush pubs. They always fascinate me, because inside there can be friends that I've known for many years, and I like to say hello to them and find out what's going on in the district. But the thing you must remember is, you must observe their rules. Look, I'll tell you a funny story. There was a chap once pulled up at the bush pub. Now, he's only wearing a pair of shorts and a pair of thongs. And when you walk into this particular pub, there's a big sign saying, a singlet or shirt must be worn in the bar, otherwise you will not be served. So he ignored this and went to the counter and said, look, can I have a beer? The barmaid looked at him and pointed to the sign. She said, would you please read that? He looked at the sign, looked at her, and says, you can stick your bloody beer. This chap stormed out of the hotel, went to his car, which was standing by the petrol pump, and sat in it for about a half an hour. Nobody came near him. So then he comes into the bar again and he said, look, doesn't anybody serve petrol? And the barmaid said, yes, I serve petrol. But the management of it told me to inform you that we're going to stick our bloody petrol.
Yeah, look, I saw a very similar case to this at Gunawachi, where some people did the wrong thing. I won't say exactly what they did, and I won't say who they were, but when they went into Gunawachi to get fuel, they were told no fuel. So they came out to us, and we were camped at well 33, and they said, there's no fuel in Gunawachi, and I just filled up. So I knew there was fuel in Gunawachi. What the people were saying was, the straight talking way of saying no fuel, you're not getting any fuel, was what they meant. But they knew if they said that they'd have an argument on their hands. So they just said no fuel.
They left him there all that day, And next morning he comes into the barmaid and he said, look, I am very sorry about yesterday. May I have some petrol? She said, of course you can have petrol. She said, we always like serving nice people. I wonder how many people realise what they're looking at here. These are not ordinary stones. Each one of those stones has been carted up here, specially selected for its hardness or its softness or for its grinding qualities, whatever it may be. This is an Aboriginal campsite, a workshop where they've worked for thousands of years making their tools. If your house got burnt down, and I was the first one there, I would expect to find everything that you would have in a house. Your pots and pans and knives and forks, and all this is in this whole area. And this is why it's so exciting to come to a place like this, untouched. This is a treasure house here. This is our heritage, all through here.
Yeah, so don't take it away. I've been to so many places where there have been these Aboriginal middens of stone tools and other things, and people take it away. There was a beautiful grindstone, massive grindstone. Massive. It was 1/2 meter long and 300 millimeters wide, and it had the smaller stone on top of it, mura muratata in one language. But it had been sitting on Lake Caroline for ever and ever and ever. When I asked Lindsay Bookie, how long has the grindstone been there? He said, always been there. And I went through one year, I don't know what year it was, 2009 or something like that, 2008, and it was gone. And I went through Lindsay's records to see who had been there in between the time that I saw it last and the time I saw it gone. And there were only 2 groups that had been through there. I know that both of those groups. And I'm not going to name them here on this YouTube channel, but rest assured, we know who's got the grindstone, and one day it will be a problem. That grindstone should be returned to Lake Caroline, put where it has always been.
Oh, look at this. That is something. That is a piri point. We don't know what they made that for. A lot of people say spear points, but there's no evidence. But that is marvellous workmanship. Look at this magnificent discordal scraper. See that work on that, the secondary work? Beautiful stuff. Just superb. These are marvellous tradesmen here. Here's a very interesting one. Look, these here are little microliths. They're so beautifully made. See the edge they've got on those? Now, he would get, say, 4 or 5 of these, and he cuts them into a stick, puts them in the stick, so they're sticking up something like that. And when he gets them in with all glued up and everything, then he can saw with this. And look, there's dozens of these little discordal scrapers. Look, little things. The same as the bigger one I just showed you, like this. And look at the size of them. It's just unbelievable. Here's one. He hasn't quite finished. See, he's made this side, nothing on this side, and he's probably broke the point off and said, stuck in the thing and threw it out. This is what would go on here. But this whole place, look, there's another little thing here. If you look down here, because the Aborigines camped here, they had to have food. And look,
I get really excited about this stuff too when I'm showing it to my clients, and you can go and you can see he's about to show us, I'm certain, animal bones that have been in the fire. You can find bits of charcoal and bits of animal bone, and God knows when that meal was prepared.
look, see all the pieces of bone? Look at it here. This is from the animals they've eaten, all over the place here, you see? Look, another one there, see? This is what observation in the bush is all about. Noticing things like this. If there's been that many Aborigines here, and it's taken a lot to do this work, then they must have had one thing, water. This doesn't look much now, but this would have been where they got their water. They would have camped over there, and this is where they've got it from. But when you look at it closely, there's a soak under here. This water is gradually draining in here.
Yes, and they would have maintained that soak. And part of the reason that it looks the way it does now is because no human being has been there to maintain it. And additionally, all of the feral animals have changed the biodiversity so much that the landscape is actually drier due to lower infiltration rates. And also camels and donkeys tend to destroy these soaks. So yeah, it needed a human presence. You know, as our Aboriginal friends say, country needs people.
And they would have cleaned all this out. It wouldn't be a mess like this. And of course, when it rained, would have filled up probably 5 or 6 feet, which would have been an added bonus. This is as near to a permanent waterhole as you could get. But it could dry up in a severe drought, and then they'd be forced to move on. But then the Aborigines were known as nomadic people, and they used to move from water to water because they had no means of carrying it. I believe the greatest thing the white man ever gave the Aborigine was a billy can, because he gave him the means of carrying water.
Oh, look, they could carry water, don't worry about that. There was lots of other reasons they were nomadic. They probably didn't need to carry water very often, but they could definitely do so.
Previously to this, they used to have to mark their waters, like this, with water markers, cans of stones. This is a waterhole. It's a natural spring. It's never been known to go dry. It's marked by an Aboriginal water marker and would have been used by the Aborigines for thousands of years, but now is used by the white man. A lot of people often ask me that if I broke down out in the bush, totally broke down, no, couldn't do a thing about the vehicle, I'm on Shanks's ponies, could I survive? And I've said, well, yes, I've been around this country a long time, and I look for nature signs. Now, I've been following this cattle pad for a while, and I've been waiting for another cattle pad to come in and join it, because when that happens, that's like an arrowhead. In dry country like this, cattle water every day. Now look, it's not unreasonable to expect water to be within walking distance. Now that I've found this water, I'm safe. I've got no worries at all, because I know that the station owner that owns this property is going to come around at least twice a week. So even if I've missed him today, I've only got to wait 3 days at the most.
Yeah, that's not so true these days, but certainly worthwhile staying by the water source. And there is a record of a fellow who survived by doing so and eating frogs and other things. So definitely still do that, but it might be more than a week or two before somebody comes around.
The first time I ever came to the Flinders Ranges, I was about 13 years of age, and I couldn't believe it. These magnificent colours, the mountains, and I was fascinated by them. And I think they've haunted me in a way ever since.
Flinders Ranges and the Gammon Ranges is beautiful country, and that brings me to our sponsors, Olsen's Tours and Training. Do go check out www.olsenstoursandtraining.com. I'll leave the link in the description. Thanks for watching.